Roll the graphic.
Oh my god, Becky, look at her butt.
Remember the 90s? Remember the 2000s? If you grew up in these periods, then you probably remember a certain channel on television playing a central role to your childhood that today feels like it's falling flat. That channel is Nickelodeon. Some of my earliest memories of my life are watching Rugrats on VHS tapes. The creative Nickelodeon shorts that would appear alongside the main episodes of the tape, combined with the old school bumpers, always made the experience of popping in an orange cassette tape all the more memorable. It seemed like Nickelodeon knew exactly what it needed to do to set itself apart from competitors like Cartoon Network and Disney. There was a charm that was present in everything Nickelodeon did, and I'm not just talking about their cartoons. Live action game shows and sitcoms, advertising, merchandising, and overall presentation. When it came to branding and staging, Nickelodeon was on top. However, over the last few decades, we've watched that branding steadily decline. But why is branding so important? Shouldn't quality be determined by the shows that a network produces and distributes? Well, media is a very complex thing because of the importance of its relationship to its audience. The responsibility of a network is to distribute programming to viewers as well as do whatever they can to make that programming succeed. An important aspect of this is using the brand of the channel to present the shows it has in the best way possible, with programming blocks and marketing. The stories we're told and the worlds we invest in will always have a framing that's important to enhancing dimension and giving a good context for what we consume. Similar to how album art should reflect the overall tone and aesthetic of the album's contents. An example is when we one day turned on and saw Doug. It wasn't quite the same. And when Samurai Jack was revived on Adult Swim, it wasn't quite the same. This didn't make the shows any worse or better, but the feeling we got from watching them had changed because of it. Even when a show's rights change hands, the experience of watching it changes. Watching King of the Hill on Adult Swim is not the same experience as seeing it air on Fox. And that experience will change again when it starts airing on Comedy Central, even though the show itself will go untouched. This is because each channel has a different style of presentation for its contents and different brands that will surround their programming.
Now the eggheads think this is what propane looks like, but I think it looks more like this.
This all matters because your brain draws a relationship between the show you're watching and how it's presented to you. It affects how you experience a show and what you associate it with. For example, if you've ever binged a batch of new episodes of Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and there was a DuckTales watermark in the corner, you might start associating Star vs. the Forces of Evil with DuckTales. This is a calculated move by Disney, a form of subliminal messaging, to make you associate their new show with the show that you already like. That way, it's on the minds of potential viewers. Now, tactics like these, they don't always elicit a positive association. However, it still works in getting that product in your brain. Tactics like these are also often used in order to set a certain mood or atmosphere that networks want you to associate with the program you're watching. Like the way Cartoon Network would show their characters in a city coexisting like normal people living everyday lives between commercial breaks.
Hey guys, groovy ride!
Want a lift? Hey!
It established an atmosphere that set the stage for the shows that would air between the bumpers. Most of us might even remember the branding of different eras of a network in association with, or maybe even over the shows that played during that period. A prime example of this comes from the revival of Toonami a few years back. Well, actually it was 6 years, but whatever. People were shouting and begging to bring back Toonami, and once it did come back, a section of those people were disappointed. The lineup wasn't exactly what it once was, partly from the fact that Dragon Ball Z wasn't airing yet, but the block still remained faithful to the original format of showcasing shonen anime dubs. So this was in spirit the same Toonami as before. Some may have been disappointed because of the fact that the block came back, but the couple of shows they loved it for didn't. But more critically, I believe the disappointment came from the fact that even though Turner Broadcasting brought back the format and presentation of Toonami, no network can bring back a point in time. It may have occurred to you that the time period that a show airs in also has an influence on our associations with it, and directly ties into how the show is branded and presented. Even though Cartoon Network and Adult Swim brought back this era of Toonami, they couldn't bring back the world in which people first experienced it in. They couldn't bring back the stress-free days of running home to watch Dragon Ball and not have any worries because there were no problems back then. I mean, there were, but we were too young to have to worry about them. Not to mention, the landscape of our culture has completely changed since then. Fashion, movies, slang, the human experience wasn't the same as it is now. So the context in which people were experiencing Toonami in 2012 compared to, say, 2005 was completely different. But even then, Toonami has managed to stay successful since its revival. However, the same issue may be where Nickelodeon's branding started to fall apart.
Hey, what's that goo? Ah, it's my sauce. I make it myself. You carry your own sauce? Doesn't everybody?
Back in the 90s and 2000s, Nick was defining themselves as well as the whole childhood experience of that period. But over time, the iconic brand of Nickelodeon has failed to stay relevant. So we need to ask what made it so relevant in the first place. Nickelodeon may have embraced aspects of hip-hop and that era's visual tastes in order to make their brand resonate with the audience, but more than anything, they were making the 90s memorable on their own. They were innovating and creating to make unique shows and showcase artists with new ideas. Even if some of them turned out to be creeps or we look back on some of the styles and cringe, it was still an iconic era full of innovation. The problem though isn't that you can't find artists with new ideas and unique styles that aren't up to no good, it's the fact that Nick got comfortable with the formats that made them money in the past, and the only changes made were ones that brought them away from pioneering the industry of children's entertainment and closer to the status quo. Nick Animation has had very little success in recent history. SpongeBob has been leading the pack for close to 2 decades, but from a critical perspective has been steadily dropping in quality, occasionally rising up and down. Meanwhile, shows like Harvey Beaks that are well received, the network cancels for not being immediate cash cows. Not to mention, Nickelodeon had the opportunity to be the home of Adventure Time, one of, if not the most popular cartoons of this decade, but turned it down in favor of Fanboy and Chum Chum, letting Adventure Time go to Cartoon Network. Allegedly, they also turned down Phineas and Ferb too, which is also an iconic show that would have fit perfectly into Nick's lineup, but instead made its home on Disney. Though I'm sure all of us know that those were mistakes by now, so let's focus on the present. A lot of the current lineup on Nick feels very reliant on past formulas for success, especially the sitcoms. Sitcoms in general are pretty formulaic and repetitive, but for whatever reason, these ones feel especially like they're just trying to follow the formulas of Dan Schneider and Disney Channel. Shows like All That and its successors embody what most of us think back to when someone mentions the 90s, or at least the good old days of Nick. Because at that time, it was new, and the kid stars were able to show their personalities to resonate with other kids. To be honest though, I don't think these sitcoms are necessarily failing with their target demographic. It's just the fact that they feel uninspired, tired, and when that audience grows up, these shows probably won't hold up the way a show like Drake and Josh did for my generation. From a financial and ratings standpoint, it seems like Nick isn't doing too badly, at least from an outside perspective. But the problem I'm trying to draw attention to isn't just in the quality of the shows, rather the construction of the lineup and the way that it's reflected by the brand. Nothing on the channel really stands out in a way that can realistically compete with other platforms. The Loud House had a full head of steam at one point, but I could never realistically see it being able to stack up to Steven Universe, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, or many other modern hit cartoons, which is fine. It doesn't need to in order to be a good show. The problem is the lack of a champion in modern Western animation is an unfortunately loud signal that Nickelodeon is not the channel it once was. Beyond the modern programming, it seems Nick is trying to get on by nostalgia for the good old days with revivals left and right, like Hey Arnold, Rugrats, Invader Zim, Rocko's Modern Life. The game plan just seems to be, let's cash in on nostalgia because our animation department is incredibly lackluster right now. But the problem with that is the original Nick brand can't just be brought back as it was. The world has changed over the last 20 to 30 years, and just because 90s nostalgia was a thing for a long time and might still be hanging on, Nickelodeon's charm has always come from the fact that it felt like a channel for kids. And when the only bits and pieces of a unique brand that you have left are appealing to the childhoods of people in their 20s and 30s, then it's not going to land the same. The branding that made all those shows successful was a product of its time. In the 1990s, it was defining an era. In 2018, it's just nostalgia. So in 2018, what does Nick's brand have to offer that isn't nostalgia? Well, when you look at Nickelodeon's current brand, it feels like a group of adults got together and said,
"This is what kids like these days, right? Smartphones and random nonsense."
But Tom, wasn't the original Nickelodeon brand just random nonsense?
No. It may have seemed like it, and I don't want to get on a high horse and pretend like it was all high art, but there was at least some level of semblance to it. They would pick a concept and stick to it, and not only that, but every concept would be different. It would be something specific, but it would change to set itself apart from itself. Even though it would be strange, they wouldn't sacrifice structure, because without structure, weirdness just blends into itself. Kinda like Nick's current presentation does. The presentation on Nickelodeon now does nothing to set itself apart from other channels aesthetically, especially since Cartoon Network has been doing the same random humor thing for years, to a point where they've just become unapologetic with their corporate pandering to kids. But even with that, I often find myself feeling like their branding is somehow more reminiscent of the classic days than Nickelodeon. Also, who told these brands that the so random humor thing is still cool? I'm pretty sure that trend died with MySpace, so now if you do it, you just kinda look like Steve Buscemi with a skateboard.
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
Am I saying all of this because I'm a hashtag 90s kid who just wants to gloat about how things will never be as good as it was in my day? Not at all. In fact, I'm a bit disappointed in the fact that Nickelodeon on multiple fronts have gone from the Hobbs to our Calvin, to creeps, evangelical telemarketers, and the evil businessman who's gonna cancel your favorite shows and build a SpongeBob-themed parking lot over it. Or I guess in this case it would be a businesswoman, but that's not how a trope works. The sad part about all of this is that Nick Animation, and the heart of everything that pulled us in decades ago, isn't dead. It's just being ignored by Nickelodeon, and quite honestly might no longer be able to call Nickelodeon home. I mean, it's no secret that Nickelodeon's hardly even in the race when it comes to animation anymore, let alone media in general. Cartoon Network is far from perfect, but they still have a lineup of modern shows that people absolutely adore, and their brand is still a huge powerhouse in Western animation. Disney is in a similar boat as Cartoon Network, producing shows that fit well with their brand, even if their treatment of animated shows is kinda questionable at times. And they don't have the same level of popularity as Cartoon Network in the world of modern animation. Yet. And even companies like DreamWorks and other streaming affiliated studios are making waves while Nick seems to be staying afloat off of SpongeBob and the Loud House. So what solution would I offer to Nickelodeon to make a comeback? Stop being so comfortable with formulaic success and being afraid to take risks. It seems like Nickelodeon has gotten to the point where they're relying on old formulas to be successful because it's not killing business. It's no secret that since its inception, Nickelodeon has progressively gotten more and more corporate. And if you're a creative studio where the business people have all the power, then naturally they're going to care more about the stability of the business than the actual quality of the product. So why take the risk of letting creative people innovate and go off format when not innovating and staying on format is keeping you above water? The answer is you probably won't. Of course, there has been a change in leadership at Nickelodeon, and I do like some of the shows they have going on right now, so who knows what the future might hold for the network. But if they don't make an effort to present themselves in new ways and find the creative spirit that the channel once had, then the network might be destined to stay mediocre as the rest of the industry leaves them behind. My name has been Tom, and thank you for joining me on The Runaway Club. Thank you for watching The Runaway Club on the Roundtable, but Tom isn't just on the Roundtable. I have my own self-titled personal channel, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, I have a Snapchat, I have all that good stuff. In fact, I even have a Tumblr. So, if you're interested in any of that, check that out, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!